Well, we finally got a garage. We've got our 5.9 12-valve Cummins back from the machine shop. It's been bored to 20 over, and we've got a whole rebuild kit over here from Interstate McBee. The crankshaft's been machined to 10 over, so everything's ready to start assembling. The engine was hot tanked, painted. It ended up costing around $1,200 for all of that, but remember, we got this engine for $600, so we're already starting a little ahead on that. The rebuild kit was around $1,200, but that includes pistons, rings, gaskets, bearings, wrist pins, all of the above, everything you need in order to reassemble a Cummins. Now, this particular rebuild kit is more of a stock rebuild kit. It's not like a Molly or a high performance, and we don't want that because we want longevity, no leaks, and stock horsepower. We might give it a little bit of fuel into the injection pump, but we're not looking at a high horsepower build on this. We want reliability. This will be going into my 95 Toyota Land Cruiser, just like we did on the last one. We're gonna be using the same swap kit from Dustin. You can go back and check out all those videos on how to swap a Cummins into a Land Cruiser. They're all in a playlist titled Cummins Swap, and then you can get all the information from there. But this is going to be kind of a ground up build, just like the last one, but this one's gonna be super clean. They also honed all the cylinder walls, so we're gonna check for ring gap and all of that. We're gonna do everything you need to know about assembling a Cummins. So without further ado, let's turn the engine over, put the bearings in, put the crankshaft in, start torquing things down, and see if we got good tolerances. I am beyond excited to start this new build. 2 years ago, I started a similar build to swap into my white 80 series Land Cruiser, and I've since sold it, but man, I miss it so much, and that's the reason why I'm building another one. These engines are just so awesome, and there's so many parts available nationwide. You can stop at any Napa or Advance Auto Parts and find parts for them, and I really want to swap this into my Land Cruiser. So I had looked at doing an OM606 or an LS, a couple other variations, or just turboing the 1FZ, but man, I just love these Cummins. You can see me here installing one of the main caps and checking plastic gauge measurements just to make sure that the machine shop did their work. They definitely did. I think the reading came back around 3/1000th of an inch, which is within tolerances for thermal expansion and all that jazz. So this block was, again, overbored and honed and painted, hot tanked and everything. So this is going to be a brand new engine. Now, I'm actually waffling on whether to go with the swap kit I used from Dustin last time or use the Rockbug Industries, which you've seen on the channel in Matt's Land Cruiser. I really want to actually try the new Rockbug kit and detail that for you guys. So if you guys want to use that kit, then you have some information, some videography showing you how to do it. That would involve using the rebuild kit for the NV4500 from Torque King 4x4, converting it from 2-wheel drive to 4-wheel drive, but I'd be able to do it all myself in my garage, and then I'd have a new transmission as well. The cost on the Rockbug kit is going to be a little bit less than Dustin's swap kit, but it will require more fabrication and all the little bits being tied up. Since I have this garage now, I'm really leaning that way. What do you guys think I should do? Comment down below if you'd like to see the Rockbug Industries adapter kit or the one I used previously from Dustin. And then just to make sure we feel good about everything being seated nicely, we'll just turn the engine over, make sure that all of our assembly lube's getting put to the places where it needs to go. Everything feels smooth and is rotating as it should. We can start looking at putting our connecting rods and pistons into the cylinder walls. We've gone ahead and put our gasket behind our front timing cover. We put the 5 bolts that go on the inside of the timing cover into the block, and then these outer ones are going to secure the lid or the front part of the front cover. So we have our camshaft inserted into the cam bore. There is a bearing. I chose not to replace that. Didn't replace it on the last one. Didn't have any issues with that. There is a retaining plate for the camshaft. There's 2 bolts that will go into the block. Those are both torqued down at 18 foot-pounds with the rest of the fasteners that fasten the front timing cover to the block. And there are also 2 timing marks on the camshaft gear that line up with the single mark on the crankshaft gear, so that you know that you can get to top dead center when you're just assembling the engine from scratch. This is the opportune time to install your killer dowel pin kit, or just make a little piece of steel on this fastener here that fastens the timing cover to the block. This is a little tab that comes from Power Driven Diesel and goes up against the alignment dowel for the timing cover. This is a huge fail point for the 5.9 Cummins. This dowel pin will back off sometimes, and get caught in the gear housing and just crumple up a lot of things. Maybe not cause any damage, as these gears are pretty stout, but we want to fix that nonetheless. So that's done. You can use whatever you like, but this is what came in the kit with the power-driven diesel killer dowel pin fix. For this next part, you're going to need a few specialty tools, and then you're going to need your piston rod assembly, whether you buy new ones or just reuse the old ones, up to you. We overboard, so we needed these oversized pistons. These are made by, again, Interstate McB, and these are the 155-degree bowl. Make sure that you get the corresponding pistons because it can have different spray patterns. Now, on this particular build, we're going to be using an injection pump from a non-intercooled VE pump. I've thought about going with an intercooled pump, but actually the non-intercooled pumps pump out more horsepower. There's probably videos you can find explaining the differences between the two VE pumps, but we're just going to use this non-intercooled pump because that's what we have. So with the piston ring assembly, you're going to get your wrist pins. These are marked with a part number. These are obviously going to go inside the piston here, and then the rod, connecting rod, will go through this here, and then this will be obviously connected to the crankshaft going up and down, causing compression. Now with your rods, there's going to be a stamped number. There we go. So you can kind of see that number there. I can't read the number in the screen now, but that's going to have a corresponding number with the rod cap. I've already lined these all up so that they're the correct numbers. But yeah, you want to make sure that these are matching. So these two part numbers correspond, so we can go ahead and move forward with this rod. We want to make sure that everything's well lubricated before we put the piston in, obviously with assembly lube on the crankshaft, but more so with oil on the cylinder walls. So we're going to make sure everything's pre-lubed up with assembly lube. Specialty tools you will need are snap ring pliers. This is just a cheap pair I got from Harbor Freight. I think it's the Quinn. And then piston ring tools or pliers. This is going to open up the ring so you can get it over the piston ringland. You're going to have 3 rings that will come with your pistons on this particular Cummins build. This is the oil control ring for the piston, and this will go on the bottom part of the piston here. So this ringland here, the very bottom one. This next one is the fire ring, and this goes in the middle. And then there's a compression ring which will go on the top. You're going to use your piston ring pliers that have this little groove in here, and they're set up to open these rings up like so. Use some protective eyewear so that if it does pop off, you don't get a shard of something in your eye, or just protect your eyes. I've learned the hard way too many times. These are the wrist pin C-rings. So this will go on the inside race of the piston here, and it's going to secure the wrist pin into the piston. Now, you may or may not need this. This is a piston ring grinder. It's a rotary style tool that allows you to insert the piston rings into this little area here, and then you'll grind on either side if they need to be clearance to fit the cylinder walls. Let's hop over to the cylinder walls and make sure that all our rings are to the tolerances they need to be. We're going to start by checking our ring gap on the oil ring. This is the bottommost ring that rides on the very lower part of the piston. There's a little gap here, and that's where we're going to be checking our tolerances. Remember, this has a spring in it, so you can take the spring out to make this part a little bit easier. So we'll just go ahead and lightly, gently take this spring out. So now we're left with just the ring. So we have our manual here, and we'll refer to that as far as the top tolerance or the bottom and low tolerances for that. There is some writing on top, and it's not going to focus, but that'll say top. This is the top part of where it's supposed to ride. This would be upside down. So we're going to put this in the cylinder bore just by hand. So we'll just go right there like that. Pops in relatively easy, especially without the spring in. And then we're going to use a piston in order to push it down to square it up in the bore. We've got our piston here, so we're going to use the top part of the piston and push it down, trying to line up all of the ring lands on the, let's say, the first ring to make sure that it's seated in there equally. Now, according to our Cummins service manual, we have between 10 thousandth and 21.5 thousandth tolerance. We're going to check our 10 1,000th feeler gauge and see if we can get it inside of the steel rails. And we can move it up and down fairly well. So I'm really only worried about the thin tolerance on this ring, because if there's not enough gap, when the thermal expansion occurs during the operating cycle of the engine, the rings will butt up against each other, and that could cause scoring on the cylinder walls or other things that could be much worse. So we're just going to take that measurement with 10 thou and call that one good. This one also is indicated saying right there top or up, and these also do say 50 because they are overboard 50 millimeters or 20,000th of an inch. So this one we'll also put into our cylinder bore. You can kind of compress the piston ring into formation with your hands and then put it in the centermost part of the bore and then just kind of flip it over. That's what I found to be most easy when doing this. And then we'll use our piston again to center it up in the bore. All right, so our piston ring is centered up in the bore. Now we need to check our tolerance on this one. And it is also 10/1000th of an inch on the low side to 21.5 on the high side. This one we have plenty of clearance here. As you can see, we're going up and down in the piston ring gap. So we know that that is good as well. Again, you could probably just install this if your machine shop did the machining right, but we don't want to have any compression issues or any blow-by issues, because that's one of the main ailing problems with a older Cummins or 5.9 engine. So we can set this intermediate ring aside. Now we have our top ring or compression ring, and this one also is marked, there we are, top 50 just like the others. Do the same sequence here, so we'll put it in the center part of the cylinder bore and then flip it into place. We'll use our piston in order to center it down in the bore, checking to make sure that we're equal on all sides. You can push this all the way further down in the cylinder, but that'll get harder to see for you guys, so we'll just leave it right there. Set that aside. Now this tolerance is a little bit different than the rest. We have more tolerance on the end gap of this ring, and I would assume that's due to thermal expansion, but we have 16,000th to 27.5 So again, we're just going to check our 16,000. I'm not too worried about these being too big as they are brand new. So we've got our 16,000th feeler gauge here, and we're going to put it in the ring gap and hope that we're good. Again, we're in good shape. That means the machine shop did what they're supposed to do, and these rings were created. I don't know how they make these. They were created to the right specifications. So again, be careful as you're taking these out. You don't want to score any of the cylinder walls, especially since we've just had this bored and honed. So now we can go ahead and start installing our piston rings onto our piston. And I'm going to do this dry at first, and then we have our basin of 1540 diesel oil that we'll dip it in, just to make sure that all of these ring lens are going to get enough oil behind them and they're not going to go in dry. We want to make sure that they're lubricated. Now we're going over top of the piston, down into the ringland. Make sure that it's seated on top of the spring correctly. We're going to worry about indexing this on the ringland and the skirt when we get the rest of them installed, but for now the lower ring is on. Next will be the fire ring, and use your guide on your install kit or whatever literature comes with your rings. You can see here that there is a chamfer on this middle ring, and the top ring has 2 chamfers, so make sure you orient these correctly. Again, just using our piston ring pliers to spread it out. Wear protective eyewear. I don't have mine on, I forgot. Easy as that. And then our final ring, which is our compression ring, and this one has the 2 chamfers on it. We'll go ahead and put that on. Go right over the top. Maybe. There we go. Now I've seen a lot of different people referencing which side to put this on, whether it's on the skirt or the wrist pin area. So whether you would put the opening on the rings on this side or on the skirt. I've heard that you want to have it on these sides of the skirt, so kind of right here, but we do have 3 of them. So let's say this oil control ring, you can see the gap is on the skirt towards the wrist pin area. We're going to orient the fire ring on the opposite side, 180 degrees. So we have this fire ring here on this side. So you can see that gap there. We're going to orient that right there. And then if we go back to our other side, you can see the oil control ring 180 degrees out from it. Since we're here with our fire ring, you never want to put the piston ring gaps next to each other, so we'll just go on the other side of the oil control ring. Now we have our wrist pin. We need to install this into the piston, and it's pretty easy. You can't mess this up. It's one way, and you want to make sure this is coated with assembly lube. So we're just going to dab some of that on there and smear it on with our hands. Make sure that it's fully lubricated. This is another component that upon the first startup, if it's not lubricated, you know, you could cause some scoring or some galling on it. So we might make sure that it's nice and lubricated, which it is. So we'll put this in one side and just get it to the point where we can get ready to install our rod into the rod bushing like that. Now here's where we need to make sure that we're orienting this correctly. If you're installing this and then just lightly turning the engine over, you'll find that there is only one way to install the rod to the piston. You can see the writing on the top of the piston and it'll say front right there. You can see that's towards the front of the engine. So if cylinder 1 is here, that's cylinder 2, which we're going to be working on, and you can't really mess it up. Now when you install the rod, you do need to have the rod cap oriented in the correct position. This is pretty difficult to mess up because this will contact the block. I believe this piece here will contact the block, or one of these do. So there's only one way to put this in. And again, if we're looking at the engine from the front, it's going to be installed this way, so that the angle of the rod bolts is facing this way, not this way. So front is marked here. We're going to assemble it with the angle of the rod cap down and to the right, or however you want to say that. And then we'll just push it through, and we're just going to push this through the rod bushing. There we go. All right, so now that's through. On each side there's going to be just enough room for your snap ring to go inside. So we'll use our snap ring pliers. So before we install the rod and piston assembly into the cylinder, we want to make sure we put this bearing in. Easy stuff here. You're just pushing it in, making it flush, and then we'll install our bearing on the lower side with assembly lube. And before I install it into the cylinder, I want to smear a little bit of assembly lube into the cylinder to make sure it's pre-lubed. We're not going to have any binding or wrecking the cylinder wall at all. And this is a fresh hone, and make sure that this thing lasts as long as possible. And you think you've got a good enough amount on there, go ahead and add a little more. You don't want any dry spots in there, as this is going to get sealed up once the head is on it, and this is your last chance to lubricate the cylinder walls. Well, we've got a nice amount there. We'll go ahead and start installing the piston. So now we have the piston ring compressor installed over top of the rings. We'll go ahead and fasten it. Being careful not to change the orientation of the rings, and get it nice and snug. Put it down into our cylinder. Again, being very careful not to score anything. A nice fit down in the cylinder. We'll tighten it one more time just to make it sure it is tight. That should give us enough squeeze on the pistons. We're going to use our rubber hammer, the end of it, to beat down on top of the piston and get the rod down by the crankshaft. Now, you want to make sure that you are down by the crankshaft with your hand, holding the rod so that it does not contact the cylinder wall. You could have the rod score the journals, and that's not what we want. And I can feel it going down. So before we go down, we're gonna place our bearing on the bottom end. So before we get it down into the cylinder, we're going to install our bearing into the rod cap. And we're just snapping this in there. It snaps in pretty nicely. And then we'll coat this surface with assembly lube as well. So just dab on a little bit of assembly lube. And then smear that on there. And then we can install this once we have the rod pushed down on the crankshaft. So now we're ready to go. We're gonna reach underneath and then continue tapping until we feel that we're close to the crankshaft. And I can see I'm almost on it. Okay, I can feel it bottoming out. So that's all I'm gonna do. Not going to hit it any harder, and we're gonna install the cap on the lower side. And now we're going to just rotate the engine over. There's piston number 1, piston number 2, piston number 1, piston number 2. So that piston's correctly installed into the block. We're gonna assemble the rest and we'll torque it down. So I've gotten all of the pistons except for one installed. I had a little accident on my last piston, unfortunately, and broke the oil ring in half. So I've got another ring set on the way, and then we'll install that last piston. But everything is seated in there correctly, except for this guy here, which we'll wait for that last piston ring kit to come and get it installed. On the bottom end, all the rods are just fastened. There's a torque sequence for these. I believe it's 25, 50, and then 72 or something like that. So once that last one comes, we'll flip the block back over and torque all these down to the right setting. So we've assembled the long block portion of this 5.9 Cummins. Next, we're gonna be working on going through the head, replacing the valve stem seals and minor little things. We've got some power-driven diesel head bolts. We're not gonna stud it, doesn't need studs. We did pick up an HX35 turbo, so we're gonna be installing that as well. But that ends the video. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.